Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And we are finally ready to get the 2045 to 2046 offseason action underway. We'll be doing it from a position of relative strength after a 100 win regular season, a second consecutive world championship, and a well regarded pool of minor league talent that is ranked number one in all of baseball, helped in some part by pretty significant investments in player development throughout the course of this playthrough, particularly the last few seasons when we've been at around $40 million a year. And since our last episode, we've made a number of trades. You may remember in our previous episode, we talked about the trade for the young catcher Steve Banks from the Miami Marlins organization. And we've made 3 subsequent trades since then to clear some salary space, to clear some spots on the 40-man roster, to get back players with options. None of the trades are revolutionary, and I think you could certainly argue that we've given up too much in some of them in terms of talent. But as it turned out, some of our big-time players were just not worth all that much. Talk about all 3 trades now. We traded away the left-handed reliever Joe Warner. He was going to struggle to make our 26-man roster, and he was due to make about $1.4 million in arbitration. And he was also a player who was finally out of minor league options, so we wanted to try to extract any value that we could from him. We also had to give up minor league right fielder Edgar Zapata, not a big-time prospect, center fielder Edgar Ramos, not a big-time prospect, and pitcher Eddie Piedra, not a big-time prospect. Plus Gregorio Garola. You may remember him. He's the two-way player that we picked in the second round several years ago in the draft. We're considering picking him in the first round and went another direction, and he happened to still fall to us in the second. He really hasn't developed the way that we hoped as either a hitter or a pitcher. You can see he's a pretty mediocre infielder defensively, pretty mediocre corner outfielder, and the bat looks like a average-ish major league bat, if that. He hit .237 with 12 homers for us at Double-A Utica last year. He's fragile in terms of his injury proneness, and he already is 24 years old. Pitching-wise, his control just has never developed. We still try to pitch him occasionally in the minors. We started him as a starting pitcher his first few years just to try to get him as much action as possible, but we've kind of moved away from that and don't see him as being a big-time pitching prospect either. So we had dropped him from the 40-man roster, and we're likely to lose him this offseason. So the fact that we were able to get anything for him, I think, made some sense. We didn't get a ton back in return. They were insistent we take 26-year-old first baseman Jeff Hallbark back. I don't see him having much of any role at all for us, but he is a guy who at least has 2 option years left, so we can stash him in Albany for the next couple years for organizational depth. And $720,000. His contract is half of what Warner was going to be making while being on the 40-man roster. But we were also able to get a minor league second baseman, Alejandro Castro, in return. Not a premium prospect, but does look with his speed and his really good gap power and some contact ability like he could be a guy who could at least have some extra base hits. The lack of home run power and the lack of walks are major issues. Does have 60 infield range and looks like a guy who could competently play defensively at several positions, and he's also a positive influence in the clubhouse. So only 19 years old, he's durable. I don't think he's a big-time prospect. Best case scenario is he's a utility infielder for a few years for us, but we at least got something back in return, and we got the youngest player back in return who hopefully has some potential to get better. I guess Edgar Ramos is just as young, but he was a guy who had come up through our international complex with a low work ethic, can't hit, despite the fact that he has good outfield range. And to me, it was more addition by subtraction just to get a guy who was not a real prospect and had low work ethic out of our DSL team. And the second trade that we've made is one that hurts a little bit. Joe Scott, our longtime closer, is now our former closer. As we've talked about in previous episodes, McClintock, who we picked up before the trade deadline last year, we made him an offer to come back as our closer next year. I think he's a little better than Scott, a little younger than Scott, and a little better personality in the clubhouse than Scott. And we've also made a big offer to our stopper, Auclair, to come back for several more years. So we couldn't really justify having 3 players in the bullpen making over $10 million a year. So we shopped Scott, and the demand for him was tepid at best. For the most part, we could get back a 35-year-old on a minor league contract, or we could get back a 2.5, 3-star kind of player who's making 10, 12, $18 million a year. Basically a lot of salary dumps for him. So I think we did as good as we could to get him off of our books. We will certainly miss him. Big-time pitcher who's had an excellent career for us, been a part of our last 3 World Championship teams over the last 5 years. Also had to give up Steve Nickel, the utility infielder we brought on before this season started, split time between AAA and the majors for us, but was out of minor league options and I don't think was a huge part of our future. Minor league pitcher Alejandro Orneas looks like a back end of the rotation starter at best if he completely develops. And then we did have to give up the reliever Chris Powers. This is another guy who split last year between AAA Albany and the major league club in Buffalo. His skill set is pretty solid, good in the clubhouse. Love the fact that he's an Iron Man. But he honestly was going to be borderline to make our 26-man roster. And he seems to be one of these guys who hasn't quite performed up to his ratings. Now, part of that could be that his stuff is his weakest rating, and stuff is pretty important to a pitcher. But we were willing to include him as well because there were certainly no guarantees that he was going to make our 26-man roster. He did have 1 option year left, but he's also 32 years old. He's not really a huge part of our future at this point. What we got back was a 27-year-old left fielder, Luis Raya. Now, I'm not particularly thrilled to be bringing on another outfielder, given all of the outfielders we have. But he was about as good as we could get in return. Don't see him having a big future for us, but he does have that captain personality if we end up having some injuries and needing to have him on the 26-man roster at some point. And he does have 1 more option year left, so for this upcoming season, we'll at least be able to keep him in AAA Albany before we decide what we need to do with him. And then we also got a 24-year-old minor league reliever, Mike Jaramillo, back. He's a guy who has 3 option years left. He's only made it as high as A-ball. But looking at his ratings, he could be a pretty useful right-handed arm of the bullpen. I think conceivably he could do everything that Powers has done for us for less money, and a guy who's almost a decade younger than Powers at this point. So I think he's got a little bit of a potential. Not a huge trade by any stretch of the imagination, and when we started thinking about trading Scott a few episodes ago, I admit I was wrong. I thought we'd be able to get more for him in return than we did. As it turned out, David Rivera, who's older than Scott and not quite as good, but was making, with the option years that we had on both of them, about half of what Scott would be making next season. The demand for him was a little higher, and we, of course, used Rivera in the deal to bring us the catcher Steve Banks. And the third and final trade that we've done since the last episode is one that I think some of you are really not going to like, but I like it. I think it fills potentially one of the holes that we have in our organization, but we had to give up a lot to get it done. We traded away the 24-year-old left fielder Juan Larios, who had come up last year and did a pretty nice job with a 115 WRC plus in 281 at-bats. Good, solid hitting prospect, durable, competent offensively, a little bit of speed, but with the incredible outfielders that we have in our organization right now at the major league level, and several more coming up through the minors, just didn't see a big role for him on the team next year, and particularly into the longer term. So wanted to try to cash in on Larios while we could and clear up a roster spot and some room for some of the younger, higher ceiling outfielders to potentially be moving into the major league roster and moving up to AAA. And then we also had to give up some other pretty good stuff too. The minor league catcher, Juan Arellano, is the worst guy in this deal. Competent defensively, but he's 21 years old, hasn't been out of rookie ball, and just can't hit. We had to give up Kevin Morrison, who's a decent reliever prospect, 20-year-old lefty, hasn't made it out of rookie ball yet and hasn't performed incredibly down there, but could have plus stuff, plus movement and acceptable control with a good fastball and a good knuckle curve if everything develops. Some positive personality traits too. So don't love giving him up, but we're willing to do it. And then the big gun we gave up was Dan Bueno. And he is a feast or famine type prospect, viewed as the number 90 prospect in baseball now. He was 2-7 with a 5.20 ERA at Single A Marathon for us a year ago, and he's now 22 years old. Struck out a ridiculous 117 batters in 72 2/3 innings, but gave up an equally ridiculous 17 homers and 44 walks. And the movement on his pitches and the control of his pitches are things that we're really concerned about, given that he's 22 years old and he hasn't made much, if any, progress on either of those counts. His stuff is potentially off the charts, with a world-class curveball and above-average fastball, as well as a sinker and a knuckle curve that could be both above-average pitches. Excellent stamina, excellent at holding on runners, but a guy with low movement and low control is just not really the type of pitcher that I want to build around. And we've got a lot of pitching depth in our organization, as we talked about when we did our minor league review last episode. So I feel like we can move on from Mr. Bueno. Don't love doing it, but he's also not the type of pitcher that I really ultimately want to have on my team. Might end up regretting it, but those are the choices we make. And in return, we got another infielder into our organization. I feel like we've got tons of starting pitching coming up through our organization. We've got tons of corner outfielders, first basemen / DHs. We just made a trade for a catcher. I really like our infield right now with Medina at second, Ferguson at third, and Essien at short, as well as Whitehead as a utility infielder. And as we've talked about a lot over the last season and a half of this series, we've also got big plans for Josh Fuchs. But felt like I wanted to add another young infielder into the mix to give us more depth at the position, because although we've been trying to extend a lot of our players, our second baseman Medina is starting to get expensive, and he's looking for really big money. I don't know that we're going to be able to bring him back when he's ultimately a free agent. He may end up being one of those guys that just plays through his arbitration years with us and then moves on. And Weisenbach, Jim Weisenbach, the shortstop that we picked up, is also Fuchs insurance in a way for us. You can see he's 23 years old, going to turn 24 early next year. made his major league debut last year, hit just a .188 and 48 at-bats, but he did hit .281 in 256 AAA at-bats before that. Has a little bit of speed. He's not Fuchs level defensively, but with that 70 range, he can play a lot of infield positions very well. Could definitely see him at second, third, or short. So worst case scenario, I think he's a great defensive utility infielder. His bat, in many ways, is similar to Fuchs. Gap power is where he's most developed. Contact and avoid strikeouts are where he's weakest at this point. Hopefully, we can get him better. The thing that I was attracted to with Weisenbach is, as I said, he's got a similar profile to Fuchs. I think Weisenbach's offensive profile is potentially a little better than Fuchs. His defensive profile is a little worse than Fuchs. But he's also a right-handed hitter, and Fuchs is a left-handed hitter. So in a situation where the batting of each of these guys doesn't develop to the extent that we'd like, the thought is Weisenbach will probably be a little better against left-handed pitching. Fuchs will probably be a little better against right-handed pitching. And we could end up in a platoon situation at shortstop for several years with Weisenbach and Fuchs potentially taking advantage of their strengths and trying to minimize their weaknesses. With that glove and the fact that he looks like he should have a competent-ish major league bat, I think worst case scenario, he's a useful utility infielder with a really nice glove for us for the next several seasons. And as I said, gives us one more lottery ticket between him and Fuchs. The hope is that one of them completely develops offensively and becomes a guy who can handle shortstop with us for the next decade. But if not, we've got a second guy is an option at shortstop, and there conceivably is that scenario where they could end up being a really good fielding platoon at shortstop and can kind of minimize some of their offensive weaknesses by only playing them when they're likely to be most effective. So we gave up a lot to bring him on board, no doubt about it, but Larios was surplus. Don't love Bueno, and even though he's certainly got some incredible stuff, and Morrison is ultimately a right-handed relief pitcher who's not, in my view, closer quality. So was willing to give him up as well and roll the dice on bringing on another high-quality defensive middle infielder, which is probably the weakest area of our organization right now. So 4 trades for the Buffalo Wings since the offseason began, and we've got a decent amount of money available now with getting Scott off of our roster. We put our scouting and player development budgets back to where they were. Don't see us having a ton of holes to fill this offseason, so I think we've got money available to be creative. If anything, kind of looking for another infielder, so we'll wait and see what the trade market ends up looking like as far as major league quality players down the line, and also potentially look at the free agent market in a few weeks. So we're waiting to see what happens with the free agent, or I guess they're technically closing in on becoming free agent, with the offers to Auclair and McClintock to avoid those players hitting free agency. And then we also have decided to make arbitration offers to starting pitchers Lance and Lott, the lefty reliever Kevin Hale, catcher Juan Ramirez, second baseman Ramiro Medina, and shortstop Mike Whitehead. Lance still looking for over $40 million a year for a long-term extension, so we'll let him pitch out his final arbitration-eligible season this year and then deal with that in the offseason. I think he could be a Cy Young Award winner this year, so would love to have him back. Ramiro Medina, as we talked about, in his penultimate arbitration-eligible year coming up, so we'll be able to bring him back one more year after this one. But he's looking for some pretty significant money, and given that we're also trying to make a long-term commitment to Mr. Casares on top of the long-term commitment that we have already made to Mr. Reichert. Medina may end up becoming an odd man out in terms of whether or not we can sign him. Ultimately, I think Jim Lance will be a big determinant of that. If we're able to sign Jim Lance to a monster deal next offseason to bring him back as our ace, I think it's pretty unlikely that we'll be able to afford Medina. If we decide to move on from Lance because the numbers he's looking for are just so incredible, then it's more likely that Medina could be somebody that we look to lock up for the medium to long term. So despite the trades away of some veteran and popular players, fan interest is still borderline off the charts, and hopefully with some of those deals we've made to our free agents and deals we're offering to our arbitration eligible players, we'll get another few bumps in fan interest over the next few weeks as we get into not earnings season, we get into award season in the game. Confusing work with real life and the excitement of playing OOTP. Think, as I mentioned, we've got a good chance to get a second Cy Young Award winner with Jim Lance this year. I would certainly think that Floyd Auclair is going to get some attention again for the Mariano Rivera Award. Rookie of the Year, I think Reichert would have been a real strong contender, but we've still got a pretty good contender for that award anyways in the youngster Jim Coles, who was 15-6 with a 3.50 ERA. Gold Gloves and Silver Sluggers have not historically been a great strength for our team over the years. Feel like we've been a bit neglected in some of those awards, but maybe we'll get an award or two this year. Can't think of anyone who's a absolutely incredible candidate for any of those awards. Medina at second base may be the strongest out there, but should be an interesting award season, and hopefully by the end of it, and by the time we get to the end of award season, we'll have all of the players we've made contracts to locked up and know exactly what our financial situation is going to look like as free agency gets underway. And we've simmed ahead several days, starting to get a lot of our players signed. Fans excited that Mike Whitehead is back. Floyd Auclair will be back. Kevin Hale will be back. Jim Lance signed his extension, so hopefully we've locked up the potential Cy Young Award winner for one more year. Chris Lott will be back as well, and you can see we've also signed a ton of our minor league free agents. Importantly, Arturo Casares inks that long-term deal that we made to him. He still has not officially had a regular season major league at-bat, but he did end up being on our postseason roster, and he was the NLCS MVP. And we have now locked him up for a 12-year deal worth as much as $169 million. Sets him up with generational wealth, and if he ends up being as good as we think he is, gives us a bargain for the latter half of that contract in particular. So we'll be paying him more than the minimum for the next few years as he's breaking into the majors, but still really happy to have him on board as well. Catcher Juan Ramirez back with us. Floyd Auclair back with us. Oh, we already talked about that. These are just articles on Auclair and Casares. So made some pretty significant progress there. Only waiting for Ramiro Medina and Chris McClintock right now. We've also filled most of the gaps on our coaching staff over the past few weeks. Or I guess really the past week, we promoted a few people and then looked to backfill, and we backfilled most of them. Still waiting to find out who our manager will be next year. We've made an offer out of our organization to bring a new manager on board, and as soon as things are firmed up, we will announce that to the world. And Ramiro Medina has now signed his arbitration eligible contract as well, which is positive. He'll be making $9.15 million for this upcoming season. Looking at, don't know why it won't let me offer him a contract at this point, given that he's signed with us now. Still would think we could offer him a long-term extension, but maybe it needs like a day to register. Was just going to try to show you exactly how much he's looking for, because it's getting, as I said, to be difficult to think that we'll be able to have both him and Lance coming back. Yeah, I guess since we just signed him, we can't make him another offer right now. But last time we checked in, he was looking for about $24 million a year for 8 years. He's a player who's good at everything. Above average hitter, above average speed and bunter, solid fielder, good in the clubhouse, and he's had some really good years for us. I mentioned I think he could be a contender for the Silver Slugger at second base this year after putting up a 138 WRC plus. Only real issue is he missed the first couple weeks of the season with an injury. Maybe not being able to generate as many counting stats will hurt him on that front. And we do have a new manager, went outside the organization, which we haven't done recently, but Ronnie Labrie will be on board. Was the manager of the Baton Rouge Sounds this past year. First experience as a manager for the 59-year-old. But he's outstanding with development, outstanding with mechanics. We think he's going to have good relationships with everyone on the team, particularly the everyday players. And he's got a personality that fit in well into our clubhouse. And he also, as a first-time major league manager, was willing to let me maintain control over just about anything that I wanted, which was important to me as a manipulative micromanager. So Ronnie Labrie is on board as the new manager of the Buffalo Wings for next year. And that at this point gives us a complete coaching staff. So one less thing to think about as we continue to sim through this offseason. And we've got award season beginning tomorrow. And some good news, Chris McClintock has signed the deal, so he will take over as our closer for the departed Joe Scott. I think, as I said earlier in the episode, McClintock's skill set is a little bit better, as his control is materially better than Scott's. He's durable as opposed to fragile. He's a positive influence in the clubhouse as opposed to a borderline negative influence. And he's also a couple years younger than Scott. So for the same money that we were going to be paying Scott this upcoming season, we've got McClintock locked in for the next 2 years, and then team options for the third and fourth years of that deal. So at this point, we've signed our arbitration eligible players. We've signed the free agents that are pending that we wanted to. We wish Jaheim Lawal and Luis Ortega the best of luck. Still waiting to hear back from actually only one pending minor league free agent that we've made an offer to at this point. So really going to start focusing on award season now and then preparing for free agency. And no Gold Glove winners today. As I mentioned, we haven't had a ton of success generating a lot of consistent Gold Glove winners in this playthrough, given that we were third in the NL in defensive efficiency and first in zone rating. Would have thought that somebody would have had a chance, but historically what we've had with this team is a lot of really good fielders at most of the positions on the diamond, but we have generally lacked that incredible, otherworldly Ozzie Smith, Devon White, Andrew Jones type of fielder that was just head and shoulders above others at his position. And we did get a personal email here on the Silver Slugger Award, so it looks like we will have at least one Silver Slugger Award. We didn't get the Mariano Rivera Award yesterday, so I'm going to check in on that. I'm guessing Eclair got some votes. Luis Ortega, okay, that one makes sense. Wasn't really thinking about him because we only picked him up midway through the season. He wasn't really with us the whole time, but he has been a perennial Silver Slugger with the Phillies before he came over as a rental for us and did combine for 24 homers between the two teams. So that one I probably should have seen coming. Second baseman was Tim Jones, did hit 324, 11 homers, 78 steals, 7.5 WAR. So I think I can understand him getting that over Medina. Although I will say, if his big attraction was the 78 steals, we had a second baseman in Deshaun Seifu who had crazy numbers of steals many years and didn't really get a lot of Silver Slugger support. 8.2 WAR for Irving Barunda this year, so another monster year for him. And then the shortstop Steve Buchan from the Expos, 8.9 WAR. Really good offensive season, and I think he's pretty good defensively as well. You look at all of these 4 Expos winning Silver Sluggers, and you would think that that team would have been more competitive with us in the division. They still made the playoffs, but 4 Silver Sluggers, and they were 88 and 74, the last team into the playoffs in the National League this year. While I'm thinking about the awards, let's go see exactly what type of support Eclair got for the Mariano Rivera Award. We know he didn't win it since I didn't get a nice personalized email with the details, but I would have to think that he got some serious consideration there. Yeah, we had second and third in the voting. Nate Ruckel, 160 ERA, our former stopper, 3-3 record, got some support. And then for the second, and then Floyd Auclair led the league in games and holds for a third straight year, 276 ERA and a ridiculous 193 strikeouts, over 140 in a third innings. So they both got first place votes and finished second and third in the voting. But Jesus Teruel of the Cubs, 7-6 record, 4 saves. Kind of surprised this guy won it over our guys. I mean, the 2.05 ERA is certainly impressive. 102 strikeouts in 88 innings. But he was really a pure middle reliever with the 22 holds, only 4 saves. I don't know. I think the fix was in on that one. I think you can certainly argue for him to win it over Ruckel and Auclair, but for him to have 30 of 32 first place votes over Ruckel and Auclair, I kind of get it over Ruckel because Ruckel only pitched 62 innings, even though he was very good in those 62 innings. But Auclair pitched 140 innings, struck out almost 200 batters, put up a 4 WAR. I don't know. I think the fix was in. I think the Cubs paid off the voters. As I think more and more about this Mariano Rivera Award, I feel like the fix was in. I don't see how Jesus Teruel gets 30 first place votes and runs away with the award, while Auclair only gets 1 first place vote. 6-2 record for Auclair, 7-6 record for Teruel. That favors Auclair. 7 saves to 4. The ERA is really what it's all about. Apparently that 2.05 ERA is viewed as a huge advantage over the 2.76 ERA that Auclair put up. And it's certainly better, but Auclair did what he did over 50-plus additional innings and only allowed 17 hits more over those 50-plus additional innings. Struck out almost twice as many batters, 193 to 102. Had the opponents hit 173 against him. His FIP of 2.38 was actually lower. Obviously, Terrell wins with his ERA plus, but WAR favors Floyd Auclair. I think the fix was in. Those dirty Chicago Cubs paid off the voters to get Jesus Terrell a Mariano Rivera award. And I think there's just clearly an anti-Buffalo bias with these voters, because for the Rookie of the Year award, Jim Coles got no support at all. J.J. Morian of the Cubs, once again. The Cubs, those dirty, stinky, cheating Cubs, gets the Rookie of the Year award. And he had a nice year, no doubt about it. 291 average, 23 homers, 76 ribbies, 133 WRC plus. Certainly can understand him winning this Rookie of the Year award. Rogelio Moreno, 36 homers, 91 ribbies. Can't fault him getting votes. Howie Frazier, though, 9-8 record with a 2.61 ERA, 219 strikeouts. A really nice year for the lefty. But he got 5 first-place votes. Coles didn't get any support at all. Steve Fontenette from Pittsburgh, 30 homers and 342 at-bats. Arturo Arroyo, a third baseman from Pittsburgh, hit 304 with 6 homers and 322 at-bats. Wally Tholen from the Cubs, 278, 18 homers, 57 ribbies. And Daniel Ancrum from the Diamondbacks, 10-14 record with a 3.38 ERA, 205 strikeouts. I don't know. I think there's some corruption in the voting this year. Coles didn't have the strikeout numbers of those 2 starting pitchers with only 172, but he was 15-6 with a 3.50 ERA and a 3.4 WAR on the season. And forget Coles not getting any votes. Chicago Cubs, surprising. Wally Tholen, 278 average, 18 homers in 406 at-bats, 124 WRC plus, 1.2 WAR. Wally Tholen gets Rookie of the Year votes. Jim Reichert, 269 average, 22 homers and 275 at-bats, 146 WRC plus, and a 2.4 WAR. Reichert doesn't get any Rookie of the Year votes. I think there needs to be an investigation of these Chicago Cubs. I think they are doing some very suspicious things, and they are officially our nemesis now. The Chicago Cubs are a dirty organization. They make the Chicago White Sox of the Black Sox scandal. The New England Patriots dynasty and the Houston Astros look like fine, upstanding organizations with the way this Cubs team operates. It's despicable and sad. And as has often been in the case through this playthrough, our now former manager, Nehomar Rengifo, won another Manager of the Year award, his 3rd consecutive award. He's looking for a job now. Did a good job with us, but we were looking for a change. And Rengifo is still looking for a job, somewhat surprisingly. And I think there's some more corruption in the voting, as we've seen the last couple awards, the MVPs and the Cy Young Awards. Andres Partida from the Baltimore Orioles, the AL Cy Young Award winner, 14-4 with a league best 289 strikeouts and 2.31 earned run average. Second award for him. Chad Ferrigno, the American League MVP, also a unanimous winner, led the junior circuit with 138 runs, 206 hits, a 337 average, a 1.030 OPS, 419 on base percentage, led the league in WRC plus and WAR as well. National League MVP once against Irving Barunda wins his fourth NL MVP award. Led the league in on-base percentage, OPS, WRC plus this year, while hitting .324 with 41 homers and 105 ribbies. So the excellent center fielder for the Expos, who was the first pick overall almost a decade ago, living up to his lofty draft status. Ramiro Medina, despite the partial season, did get some votes for us, along with Jim Lance and Josh Porter. So a little bit of love for the Buffalo Wings in terms of the MVP voting, but not an excessive amount. But the National League Cy Young Award goes to Esteban Guerra of the San Francisco Giants, a unanimous Cy Young Award winner, despite not leading the league in any categories. 17-7 record, 2.16 ERA over 183 innings, 252 strikeouts, 185 ERA plus, 68 FIP minus, and a 5.6 WAR with a 270 SIERA. Certainly an excellent season. But I don't know that it's a unanimous Cy Young Awards season against Jim Lance, who was 18-5 with a league best 2.02 ERA, a league best 0.88 WHIP, a league best 58 FIP minus, and a league best 6.7 WAR. Just seems like strikeouts might be the most important thing that they care about. I just don't see how the season Esteban Guerra has wins unanimously over Jim Lance. Lance had more wins, including tying for the league lead, fewer losses, a lower ERA, including leading the league. They both pitched 183 innings. Strikeouts certainly favor Guerra. Like I said, it seems like strikeouts is what this is all dependent on. Both held their opponents to batting averages well under 200. Guerra admittedly better at 166 versus 186. Lance led the league in WHIP, and he was 0.2 of a batter fewer than Guerra allowed. Lance led the league with only 2 walks per 9 innings. Lance led the league in WAR and was a full win above replacement, better than Guerra. I don't understand. I mean, Lance's FIP was lower. His FIP minus was the best in the league, as we talked about. There's been a suspicious anti-Buffalo bias in the voting this award season, and because of that, I think we're just going to go out and have to kick the butts of everyone in the National League and everyone in baseball again next year. And maybe that'll teach them to treat us with a bit more respect when it comes to the voting for these silly awards. And we made it to the beginning of free agency, so before we finish up the episode, we'll take a look at who's out there. International free agents first. Luis Aguirre looks like a decent starting pitcher at 26 years old. Don't think that's a huge need for us, so probably won't be involved in pursuing him. Another starting pitcher, Juan Morales, another guy who looks like a 4th or 5th kind of starter, 29 years old. Not looking for crazy money. A lefty, some good personality traits. We're going to at least request a scouting report on him. He's a guy who wouldn't necessarily mind bringing into our organization. Does look like he's better against lefties than he is against righties, as you'd expect. So he could be a useful lefty specialist perhaps down the line. catcher, Dong Ki Kim, brilliant defensively. Not much in terms of his batting ratings. Unfortunately, it looks like he's already signed with the Expos before we could even get a look at him. So not the most impressive class of international free agents ever. A lot of pitchers, though. As far as the regular free agents, a few familiar names. Our old pitcher, Juan Estrada, the two-way guy, back on the open market. A couple of catchers, including Ortega, who was with us for the last couple months, won a World Series with us. Irving Barunda, the incredible center fielder from the Expos, is available. And then Harlan Campeau, who at one point was an excellent pitcher. Looks like he struggled with some injury issues last year, but was still pretty effective when he was actually on the mound. Still looks normal in terms of his injury proneness. So there's some interesting players available, and we do at this point have about $22 million to spend. So if someone was willing to do a short-term deal, we could potentially bring them on board. I'd really prefer it to be a one-year deal. If it's a multi-year deal, probably have to ensure that there's no prohibitions on us moving on from players in trade, because despite the fact that Jim Lance still has literally no hardware for the course of his career. He's never been named an all-star. He's never been named Cy Young Award winner. Never won a Rookie of the Year. Never won a postseason award. He's been a pretty darn good pitcher over the course of the first 5+ years of his career, with a 1.46 ERA plus and a 70 FIP minus, and he's going to be looking for crazy money next year. Actually, the deal is a lot more reasonable now. He had been saying he was looking for over $40 million. Maybe the fact that he didn't win a Cy Young Award has him a little more realistic in his demands. I don't know that we want to give him a 9-year deal with all of the optionality being in his court, but that could be something for us to think about right now, because we do have enough money available next year when the extension would kick in to get him signed right now. So that could be an option for us as well, but we'll take a little bit more of a deep look here quickly as far as the top hitters available. Clearly, Irving Barunda would be incredible, but not a huge area of need for us. A player like him would help any team, and we'd make a spot for him on the team. But with the good young outfielders we have, and the fact that Barunda is looking for about $45 million a year, I don't think that's a direction for us to go. Max Ziegler is a really impressive second baseman, but he's wrecked physically, going to be 35 years old in the early weeks of the season, even though he's coming off a year where he hit .359 in the majors. I don't think that's a direction we go. Ortega, we already decided not to go. If the price on Steve Anderson came down, could we put him into the mix among our infielders? Perhaps, but I think we've got enough youth that that final utility infielder spot could go in a different direction. If the price on Toby Golston came down, though, he could be in the mix. If the price on Jaheim Lawal came back, we could reunite with him. So there's definitely some options out there. Nothing that I feel like we have to do among the hitters. Pitchers, as usual, a lot of good relievers on board. Our old buddy Sincere Shazier is a reliever now at this point in his career. That's interesting. Campeau certainly stands out. $19 million is not an incredible amount for a pitcher like him. If he was looking for a 1-year deal, that could be something to think about. Oof, and he is only looking for a 1-year deal. We don't need a starting pitcher, but Harlan Campeau is a perennial all-star, former Cy Young Award winner over the course of his major league career. Led the league in wins 3 times, strikeouts a couple times, whip once, FIP minus a couple times, 171 and 92 over his career. 35 years old. Another 3 or 4 good, healthy, productive seasons, and he's a borderline Hall of Famer. 67 career WAR. He's not far off that level. We don't need him, as I said, but if we could put a pitching staff of Jim Lance, Alexis Barajas, Harlan Campeau, and then the young Mr. Danny Black, who's going to be making his debut this year, put those 4 at the top 4 of our rotation. I feel like Lance, Barajas, Campeau, and Black, that's lights out for the rest of the league if we do that. And it's only a 1-year commitment. It's definitely something I'd consider. Chris Newell is an excellent pitcher as well, but at 29 years old, I'm guessing he's going to be looking for a long deal. Yeah, $33 million a year over 9 years. And as good as Troll Newell is, $34 million a season for him, I think I'd rather think about engaging with our buddy Jim Lance and maybe extending him at 28, 29 million for an extended period of time. But with 22 million to spend in Campeau available, gives us an opportunity to bring another Canadian pitcher into our organization. We've had a lot of success with Canadian pitchers over the years. I'm tempted to just spend our free agent money on him. It's almost too perfect for us that he's only looking for a 1-year deal. And with the moves that we've made, including getting Scott's contract off our books, that's the money we have available this year. We don't have to make a long-term commitment, so we can still perhaps get Lance signed for the long term while bringing in Campeau for this year. And as I said, the top 4 of that pitching staff: Lance number 1, Barajas probably moves to the 3 guy behind Campeau, and then you put the rookie Black in the 4 spot. Manelli moves to the bullpen, obviously. He's moving there anyways with Black coming up. And then Coles or Lott, one of them moves to the bullpen at well. You've got a 15-game winner or a 17-game winner who's going to be moving to your bullpen. That pitching staff is very enticing to me. So if you've got thoughts on what you would do in this situation, would be helpful to hear them. If you've got thoughts on the trades that we made, love getting the feedback and the first guessing and the second guessing. So it's always interesting to hear your perspective on those trades. But I'm kind of intrigued by Harlan Campeau. We're a win now team. We're going for a three-peat, and he's only looking for a 1-year contract. It seems to me like a perfect match. I don't know why we wouldn't do that. Because really the only potential hole that we have on the team that we're looking to fill this offseason is a second utility infielder. Right now, Whitehead is our primary utility infielder if everyone can stay healthy. You can see Whitehead, because of injuries, tends to become a starter for us. But Whitehead would be our number one utility infielder right now. And then Juan Palomo, the 24-year-old who spent the year in Double-A, would probably be our second utility infielder. Both of those guys can play multiple positions. Both of those guys have at least competent-looking bats. I don't feel bad at all about having those two guys as our utility infielder. As I talked about, when you look at the free agent market of the hitters, there definitely are guys who could help us. You know, Steve Anderson, Toby Golston, Jaheim Lawal. Lawal and Anderson, both former Buffalo Wings at this point, and Golston, a guy who we've looked at on multiple occasions. I think all of those guys could help us as a utility infielder, but right now they're all looking for over $10 million a year. Anderson looking 5 years, over $60 million. Golston, 5 years, almost $70 million total. And Jaheim Lawal, 4 years, $40 million. I think particularly defensively, Golston and Lawal are upgrades over Palomo and Whitehead. But I don't know if they're worth millions and millions of dollars a year more over those guys to just kind of upgrade a utility infield spot. Particularly given the fact that although they aren't ready right now, we're hoping maybe towards the end of the season Josh Fuchs is ready to help us. And maybe even earlier than that, Jim Weisenbach is ready to help us. I feel like we're probably okay for a guy who's a fifth or sixth infielder. You're going to have to make a pretty strong argument in the comment section to me as to why we wouldn't bring on Harlan Campeau next year and try to have an incredible top four of our rotation. It's only a 1-year commitment. We can still make an offer to Mr. Lance to bring him back. In fact, I'm going to work on that right now before we finish the episode just to get it out there. It seems like a perfect fit to me, but maybe I'm missing something. And Lance, as we talked about, still looking for big money, but the sticker shock of when he was looking for $40 million a year before he had signed his arbitration deal and before he didn't end up receiving the Cy Young Award, the sticker shock on that, maybe, I don't know if $30 million is a steal for him by any stretch. You know, it's probably a fair price, but he's 28 years old and has been a pretty darn good pitcher for us thus far. I'm going to try to get him for less money, and I'm going to try to get the optionality a little more in our favor. But we're going to see what we can do with Boo Lance. All right, we're going to see how this goes. As I mentioned, he was looking for 9 years, over $30 million a season. Player opt-outs after the 4th and before the 8th and 9th years of the contract, and he also wanted a full no-trade clause. We're coming in at 8 years, $27.75 million average, so we're off by close to $2.5 million a year lower on the contract. We've got team options in the 7th and 8th years. We didn't include the no-trade clause, although in the middle of this contract, he will effectively have a no trade by 10 and 5 rights by that point. So I'd be willing to add the no trade clause back in, but trying to keep as much flexibility as possible for us initially. I don't think he goes for this, but I don't think it's completely insulting either. interesting. He's willing to come down in money to less than $29 million a year. The no trade clause is important to him, but he also has put in a number of player options again. I'm going to come back to him with the no trade clause, but less player optionality, a little more money, and see what he thinks. All right, I've tried to get creative here and meet him in the middle. He was looking for 6 years and an average of $29 million with a no trade clause and an opt-out after the 4th year. We're coming back with still 8 years. We've upped the money to $28.125 million, so we're pretty close to being there as far as the money. And we did also include a player opt-out for him after the 5th year rather than the 4th year, and we added in the no trade clause. Now, if he does opt into that final 3 years and $90 million, we do have team options on the 2nd and 3rd season. So in a way, it's really a $30 million option for him for 1 year if his career has gone off the rails. I think it's a decent compromise. I think there's a pretty good chance he goes for this. And he is going to think about it. So we will get that offer out to Boo Lance, 8 years, up to $225 million. We'll see what he has to say, but would love to get him locked up. And as I mentioned, that doesn't take Campeau out of the equation for us. So I think we're in a really interesting spot here. As I said, you're going to have to give me a strong argument of why we don't add Harlan Campeau in. We're going for a three-peat. We're in the same position that the Kansas City Chiefs are now in the NFL offseason. Got an opportunity to do something that it's been almost 50 years since it happened in baseball with the 98 to 2000 Yankees. And I just don't see a reason why we wouldn't add Harlan Campeau to this pitching staff and have an incredible top 4 to guide us through the regular season, and even more importantly, feel like we've got an ace quality pitcher on the mound every game in the postseason when we move to a 4-man rotation. But I am open to other opinions and other interpretations, and if you have one, let me know. Let me know if you think I should take the Chicago Cubs to court for the corruption of the voting in the NL Awards. Perhaps it goes even deeper than that. I don't want to cast aspersions, but based on what's going on with the Major League Baseball new uniforms right now, I think there's a chance that Nike might be involved also. But whatever it is, it's an anti-Buffalo conspiracy. And the only way to handle that anti-Buffalo conspiracy is to build a juggernaut that can win a 3rd title in a row in 2046. So that's going to be our primary goal this offseason. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.